Okay, and I would like to thank you everybody for braving the cold weather and rain and come over to listen to me. So there's the cover of the book, as you can see. That this is just a doodle I had in the summer of 1975. Summer, that means January, February, December included, but January, February is the hottest in Rio de Janeiro. And everybody goes to the beach there, and we were there sitting afternoon and sleepy, and I start doodling. I got tired of the subject. And that's what it came, except the thing in the middle with the window on the forehead and the sun. The sun is because of visions of light that I began to have. And I had one experience that it really opened this window there. It's a kind of curved diamond shape that it would open and then close, and I played around with that. And the doodling, the funny thing is that that time I never imagined I would be involved with the mind and consciousness. So it's kind of was a prediction of my future, that I would not only be doing physics. In that time I don't know if I would be to engineering too, but there it is. I thought it was amazing. I said, well, I put that in the cover in the book, that life sometimes takes us to paths that surprise us. And I had many surprises, including the wind on the forehead, believe me. Oh yes, the lights too, oh. Anyway, this book is about myself, of course. I try to tell really a brushing about my life on the first chapter only. The introduction to the book, I explained the title because HYPNAGOGIA, it's a different name that not everybody knows about. And it is really self-experiments because that is how it all started. First with uncomfortable experiences, and then later in life I started discovering that I was also actually leaving the body. But anyway, so let's follow this. First is what HYPNAGOGIA. Academically they call hypnagogic hallucinations, which I find it bad, because those are not really hallucinations, but it's imagery coming either from the subconscious, or you actually open your third eye and ability to hear if somebody comes to you and talk to you. So if it happens when you are falling asleep, it's called hypnagogic. If it happens when you are waking up, it's hypnopompic. The hypnagogia was suggested by Andreas Mavromatis, and I have his book here to show you. Hypnagogia, the unique state of consciousness between wakefulness and sleep. And that was his doctoral thesis in psychology in England. And it can be a little difficult because, you know, that's academic. But the information contains everything, and of course includes all the stuff that I have gone through, and many people have too. So the hypnagogias would be the imageries that we see, the dream imageries, the visions, whatever that comes up. So as I say, includes visual and other sensory imagery that includes perception that appear at the threshold of sleep and wakefulness, but that includes perception, touch, hearing, seeing, and of course the perception of you separating from the body, or returning to the body if it is before waking up. So in my learning, I got this mind situations in my first talk to INACS, And I'm just putting here just for you to as a preview. And I develop my own language. So conscious mind is the mind that we work with every day. And the unconscious mind is like Jung named that. And I usually call it a subconscious mind and superconscious mind, or a higher self kind. And of course, this hypnagogia would happen between awake and sleep, as will happen also trance. And of course, dreams and lucid dreams and out-of-body experience, your body will be sleeping. But the remote viewing, the meditations that we do, usually you are awake, but in what they call alpha theta situation. And the threshold is actually the alpha theta situations. But it is similar to the borderland of sleep too. But there's the other situations of waking somnambulist, which is a different situation of the mind that is not yet completely well understood. There's still a lot of confusion about that. So trances and subtle influences and learning kind of goes back, in and out of those situations. So the hypnagogia dream imagery happens while falling asleep, while the hypnagogia dream imagery. Did I go back? No, I didn't. Okay. Kind of repeat, so. Waking up, usually you can still be dreaming, and some people can completely wake up and the dream, the imagery of the dream, they still see it. I knew actually a psychologist who had that experience. And that's what I say, when the imagery may appear when one is fully awake, like in cases of schizophrenics who may have that, and other people that may be considered mentally ill, but that perhaps they may also be considered just healthy. The being mentally ill has problems in definitions in many ways. But visions by itself, the imagery that happens while awake, I consider the only as being a consequence of the opening of the Ajna chakra, that one over here. The same that, that little window, in my case, I was in the threshold. So also called the third eye. So the imagery that appears that, the dreamlike imagery per se, they are supposed to be stemming from the subconscious or the unconscious, what I call the superconscious mind. And, Jung made a career from that. And one thing actually is a quite recent learning. Jung experimented with a practice that he finally called active imagination. And this imagery sometimes can happen while you're fully awake. And I did meet somebody, to Charles McClelland, and might know Kevin, a psychologist who is a Jungian. And he was able to have the imagery appear and he interact in everything, just like Jung used to do. I found it extraordinary. I didn't know there was such a thing. So, so I had to keep asking and questioning him and talking to him about that. But alas, there can be also common encounter with the so-called spirits. Spirit is a way, in the threshold of sleep, some spirits can reach up to you, and if you are deep enough that you don't wake up, for their being alert, they can talk to you. And I did have an experience with that with somebody I suspect is my grandfather, my mother's father. Sound of the voice, the accent from Minas Gerais, from where I was born. They're the same. I was in São Paulo. They have a different accent with more rolling R's. So obviously, the voice, the sound of that my uncle had is similar to him. So I said, there's only one person. And he died actually before I was born. My mother, I think, was just 16. But that's one strong example. I had others, not so neat like that one, but I had. But another problem that can happen with the opening of the third eye during this threshold, falling asleep or waking up, is that it doesn't seem to have a well-established frequency of where it sees. If it is another world, there's several levels. We always been taught about it, right? Sometimes they get the lower level and they get the little monsters coming up and bothering. And that is not a good experience, because if the person knows nothing about it, the first thing they think, oh, I'm going crazy right now. And they don't want to talk to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, because they will be labeled as mentally ill for sure. So in the 90s, at a certain point, we would start interacting through the internet. So we had, I think, the University of California in San Diego had a sleep website. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it. But people would go there and tell those stories and didn't know what to do. They wanted, information about it. And it was from those stories that Jean-Christophe Terillon, French-Canadian physicist that was living in Japan, and he started asking for stories, and I contacted him, and we started exchanging information, and we wrote a paper that has been cited many times since then. Now it's more common. It's academic, it talks about effects of drugs and everything, but it was when people would discover it in the internet, they had and I think I'm going to get to that, so it'll be a repeat. People would get to the internet and see that. But then the Discovery Channel presented a program called The Entity, where they discussed about that a lot, and its relation to out-of-body experience, because one way out of that is to transform that and get out of the body, and then everything disappears. So the person is not crazy at all. It's just that oddity, and it changes. For me, for example, I had the experience. Only once I had a bad feeling. That's one of the things you see. But my brother had others odd. That is a funny one, because it's like taking the drug, the spray of, in Brazil we call, they use on the carnival there, and it was prohibited because it's a drug that changes your mind. And my brother would take that spray. It comes from Argentina, so he bought it to experiment with. And then the first thing he talked to me, that he said he fell out of his body, like backward, and he saw himself out of the body. My last trip to Brazil in 2017, he told me the rest of the story. Oh, but I stopped smelling that, because I would see all those crazy guys coming to me like crazy, like in a jar, and they wanted to sniff whatever I had sniffed. They would get that thing from him in that situation. So he didn't like the experience, so he stopped. So, a good thing about that, though. Yeah, so the worst types are the mean, gross, evil types, and those are, people cannot sometimes deal with that. And many of the mentally ill in hospice, they lost it. That's they call I will get to that. So one guy who dealt with that was Wilson Van Dusen, because he was a psychologist working in San Diego in the hospital there. And he started talking with those people. Well, he like Emanuel Swedenborg, who learned a way to control those visions and enter that and communicate with the spirits. So he started inquiring, talking with the ones willing to talk with him and communicate with these spirits to them. And sometimes the subject would be a high level, depending on the type of the spirits they thought he would communicate with. And some other one was low level. They didn't understand anything. It was really kind of ignorant types. And sometimes the subject from the higher level, the subject being discussed, the patient had no idea what they were talking about. So that shows the independent character of the spirits as compared to just imagery from the subconscious. So let's put the next one. Yeah, that's what I say, when a person cannot handle this experience and become what they call dissociated, right? Bob. Bob worked here in this town with mentally ill, so he should know. So that is when they become mentally ill, because it crossed their limit, the ability to tolerate that, because it's absurd and, you know, interfere, and sometimes if they are speaking, they will scream, they just can't deal with it. But again, many things in psychology or even in healthcare that they give labels, it can be misleading. Dissociation is not yet completely fully understood, but, you know, I believe a more understanding of the mind can perhaps change that. So, now let's go back to my story again. How did I get involved with the subject? Well, the mother of all curiosities, right? We are children, we are curious. I had a colleague, a friend of mine, my parents were visiting her parents, and then she wanted to tease me and said, "Did you know that we have spirits that you don't see all the time around us?" I said, what? What is that? And she laughed and teased me about. So when I walked home with my parents, I asked the question to them. I said, "Oh, don't worry about that. That's not a problem." Well, I was so shocked that I can't remember everything of it was, you know, sun had gone down, everything getting dark, the nature, everything, the walk, and me puzzled about spirits. I didn't know about it. Well, so background, cultural influences are key in developing our curiosity. In Brazil, of course, it starts with family members telling ghost stories, and it's a fun thing to do, and of course it's more fun because there's always a poor guy who is very afraid of ghosts, and in the farmland they had to walk in the dark. So they were the butt of jokes at that time, as you can imagine. So cultural influences, and also my father's involvement with esotericism, you know, kind of light. He was confused. He thought there was a new type of religion other than being a Catholic, which was the usual in Brazil at that time. But anyway, the other opportunity came to education. So I had the opportunity to enter physics. In my graduate school, right in the beginning, one of the professors talked about what is now known as remote view, the article that Halput Hoff and his colleague had published in, was that Nature magazine, Bob?
I believe it was. In the 60s.
Yeah, in the 60s, yeah. No, it was the 70s, because that was 1975. It had just been published. So he talked about invited the students and colleagues to make a group of discussion about the paranormal and all that good stuff. And he knew quite a bit about hypnotism too. I mean, he experimented with that. And later in life, already in San Antonio, I was trying to see if I could change my art in physics to medical physics. And I met Terry Micatin, and again, he suggested me to get involved with neuroscience, and it started. There was a cognitive neuroscience, so there's when I had my opportunity to learn about the brain, and I was interested. I wanted to know how things related to this all other paranormal stuff. And of course, the 90s was a good time to start searching for information. Not only I had contacted Universal Text with their excellent libraries, but I discovered they had New Age libraries there, and I was wondering, I was amazed at the amount of stuff they had. And other situations are what I call the synchronicities. It's one of the most puzzling things in life that bring you to important situations, not only opportunities to learn and opportunity to meet people and to learn specific things that you have that little, you know, attraction to certain subjects and different stuff too that you don't imagine existed. So my early years, as I said, I had the ghost stories. Stories of healing, there's a lot of that in Brazil. And odd practice, in this case would be the African related spiritual practices. family and friends, and I tell one chapter in the stories of what we call benzer or benzição. You know, it's certain prayers some people can cure by just saying it, nothing specific, but some verses and the thing heals you. And I had one, I didn't even know he could do that, and he did heal me. It was something in the skin that is difficult to heal, in my leg. He but making the sign of the cross, and 2 days later, it was gone, completely gone. So, as I said, my father's involved with esoteric philosophy. He had those books he brought from São Paulo. And of course, I would peruse them and ask questions and such. And influence obtained from spiritists, but this happened later in the area around Brasilia, because there were a phenomenon of a community of spiritists, and then another one was closed and the other one was open, that Tia Neiva had started, and her phenomena, her ability to see and communicate with spirits happened all of a sudden in her adult life, already mother of children and such. And then she started. They asked her to start the community, and she started. And again, the graduate school opportunity to learn about the paranormal, and that is, I mean, the perception at a distance of remote viewing. Then is what I call the middle years. I was a little more informed by then. And I had returned to Brasilia from São Paulo and found a job at University of Brasilia. And I had a friend who would find people dealing with UFO. And those were weird people, and I was sick and tired of meeting them, and they made no sense, and we go trips and so on, and they could see them and not. There's good reason that you tend to believe, because there are a lot of sightings of UFOs in the area around Brasilia, because it was still quite wild at that time. You know, it was one airport and not too many airplanes would arrive at that. So it was perfect for that. But then, when I had given up, Bianca came over for a big encounter, a big group of about UFO, and apparently she was one of the abductees, and she came back with this technique of out-of-body experiences. And of course, involving this kind of abduction and such is tricky for me to tell. And when my friend brought me and I said, what this has to do with UFO? Oh, but it's not very expensive. Let's just pay, you know, and try, because she promised if it doesn't work, she would give you back the money. Oh, great, so let's do it. And it was one of the best things, phenomena that had happened to me before then. And I searched many books, you know, the esoteric books, and I couldn't explain, you know, sleep paralysis, where I had perception and, you know, noises and energy, strange things. And of course, when you are young, you sleep late, and then I felt myself going out of the body, get dark and get back, you know, very quick stuff, and I didn't understand. It was already by the end of my master's, I stopped by the place where the fraternity, Rosicrucian fraternity had a site, and the president was there, and I told him about it. I said, look, I never had those, but from what I read, I think your symptoms are of having out-of-body experience. And I said, wow. So when I met Bianca and did the exercise, and it starts everything, including seeing lights, and I didn't understand why I was seeing it, you know, like, you know, car headlights going by, and it was strange. And I didn't know about Kundalini until much, much later. So it was later I said, well, that's the thing. That's Kundalini energy, or life energy, whatever you call it. So in chapters 3 and 4, I describe my encounter with Bianca and the exercises that she taught and I practiced for several years. In the chapter 4, I was already in South Africa working at University of Pretoria, and I decided right away when I arrived there to find a psychologist who knew about hypnotism, because I thought I could improve my memory from my experience, because it's very slippery. You wake up, it tends to, if you don't take notes right away, it tends to disappear quickly. So I found this lady, and a very nice lady, and she helped me for free. And I began, testing Bianca's exercise every day, and without interruptions. With before, I was always interrupted because I was moving around. It was complicated, and I did that for at least 3 years, and then I started interrupting again. But there's when things happened, and happened a lot. So the learning about lucid dreaming happened while I was at the graduate school. So it was before I went to South Africa. And then I went to a New Age. I went to a library in a mall, and there was a New Age aisle, and I was perusing that. And I saw this book, Lucid Dreaming by Stephen LaBerge, and I picked it up and was reading. Well, this part is quite similar to my out-of-body experience, or when we awake in our dreams and then produce out-of-body experience from there. That's how we understood. That was one of the ways. So I got the book and was amazed, investigating there, with Fermilab and the computers and such. I discovered that he would work with a sleep research group in Stanford. I said, sleep research? Do they have sleep research? So I contacted and got papers and read it. I was amazed. So my postdoctoral was done to an invitation from the University of Chicago, the astrophysics group, but they had a link with the astrophysics group with Fermilab, the Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory. They have on the 3rd floor, the main high-rise, which is ultra-modern, or what they call mid-century, mid-20th century, 50s, 60s. Brasilia, as Joe said, that's where they had that format. They have a double building like that. Fermilab, they had a double building that opened there. That's kind of 2 particles in different types of charges, so when it goes to a magnet, they go in different directions. So the building was to demonstrate that. So I look at that and I say, modern, I'm staying here. It's, it's country type. And they had a better place than around the University of Chicago. It was kind of scary. So there was no double thinking about it. I'll stay here. If it's same thing, good. So, but, it was around, looking around. Internet at that time was still in the beginning. If the World Wide Web had not started yet. That started CERN. It's another big accelerator. This is related. Well, in the middle years, I also learned and that again back at in São Paulo, the Institute of Theoretical Physics, where I got my master's and doctorate. And there I met his name, I have to write the name sometime, I forget. Hernani Guimarães Andrade to Valdir Aguilera. Valdir Aguilera was the professor, I said, that gave the talk. And then he talked about poltergeist. Poltergeist is an odd thing because it starts and it's obvious there is a transmission between dimensions. Stones appear, objects appear, and there's noise and knock and mess, and it's a confusion. A house who has that, it's difficult to deal with. So, and Hernani studied there for many years and had many case stories. And they discovered, somebody from the United States visited them and he was shocked at the amount of material he had. And he was a funny guy, in his 70s, and we went to visit him. Valdir took us there. The group that I said that we will meet and discuss paranormal. And there he had slick hair up to here, suspenders in a very wide pants, kind of, out of place, and he would talk, doing like this. I never forgot. Was what called my attention then. Never mind his knowledge, but oh boy, that's what sometimes makes life good. Well, and then the stories of UFO phenomenon, the unidentified flying objects. Of course, as I said, in Brazil, Prince in the interior, there are many cases. In Brasilia was one of those areas that frequently have them. But later in life, I have discovered that a lot of happen UFO, it disappearing, appearing out of the blue, and mimics, including producing poltergeist kind of phenomena. So I did finally write a chapter on that because I couldn't escape, not only to Bianca being that origin and then all this, so I wrote there. You see my stories there. Okay. Now here I already told you about South Africa, my experiment with self-hypnotism to help memory. And the exercise using Bianca's technique, because I needed to test that seriously. I wasn't believing there very much. So that's when things started happening, and the strange lights. When I was back in USA, it was about February 1991. I was still doing it. And suddenly I was very deep into, by the way, I didn't know about meditation states at that time, this deep state that you get when you're doing good meditation. And I was there, very into it, and suddenly that big shining light on my forehead. Well, where is that coming from? And it repeated, after the shock, it repeated another time. Then I couldn't control anymore, just woke up and looked around because I was in a dormitory for students there. It was south, near McAllen, the Edinburgh, University of Texas, Pan American. And my head was toward the head, and I thought, would there be cars with light reflected on there, and I'm super sensitive? But no, everything I tried, nothing. It never can even close. I wrote to my friends, including Valdir Aguilera from São Paulo, the professor, and Valdo Vieira from Rio de Janeiro, who, before I came to the United States, he had written a big book on out-of-body experience, and amazing. You can have it there in English now. And they came out, oh, there must be spirits of light, there are luminous spirits that approached you. But it was on my forehead. It was not, out like this that I can see. Well, that wasn't an answer until about when I had already moved to Austin. We moved there in February 1993. And then I discovered this new age at Lamar, South Lamar. And I perusing that, I discovered this book. You see the amount of little marks? It's meaningful, isn't it? The autobiography of Gopi Krishna, Living with Kundalini. And reading to that, I discovered the experience of life. Oh, heavens, that's it. That's my experience there. After a while, and with the internet and reading other books and other experience, I could immediately determine that my experience were somehow the practice that I learned from Bianca were similar to meditation in general, just with some differences. And that was stimulating the energies in the body that is called life energies in the Christian mystics, or the Kundalini in the Eastern mysticism. So, starting in 1992, when I was in San Antonio learning about cognitive neuroscience, I started investigating more. And at first it was a little, here and there, and then, trying to see more about lucid dreaming, more about out-of-body experience. It was 1992, I approached the Mind Science Foundation San Antonio and told them they should invite Stephen LaBerge to come there for a workshop. I thought it was interesting, and they accepted, and they brought him there, and it was nice. But when I talk about the lights with Stephen, he said, did you know that if you push your eye to the side, you can see light in your eye? Yeah, of course, but that's not like that. He couldn't believe those things exist, and I was amazed because all the experience, it's so close. I didn't understand it. But anyway, it was again a synchronicity that I like to call synchronicity that brought the explanation for the light on the forehead, the Kundalini phenomenon, or one of the stirrings. They like to call it stirrings, right? So there it is, meeting Stephen LaBerge's Mind Science Foundation. And then later, not much later, was I think around 95 or so, that the story of the remote view started heating up in the internet. And I discovered then Paul Smith in Austin was giving courses. He was making money to pay for his graduate school in philosophy at University of Texas. And I contacted him, and he let me see, he invited me to go to the introductory talk that was given by Hal Puthoff. And then Hal Puthoff talked about the Society for Scientific Exploration, that foreign scientists, that it doesn't follow the normal academic, they have interests like me, curiosities, extra. And it needs a referral. So as he said, he referred me to the Society for Scientific Exploration, and that's when I started. And I have been there since then. Also, I improved my knowledge in hypnotism, and I discovered Adam Cab-3 and this interesting book, Multiple Man, Exploration in Possession in Multiple Personality. And I said, I know about that. Spiritists in Brazil had a lot of that. So it's like that. Again, and he wrote other books, and I read them, and I was amazed. So it was a little link between the trance that they talk about in hypnotism and the multiple personality and those odd stuff. Also, it was at that time that also I got to learn about brain states in physiology to the works of Elmer and Alice Green. Sorry, I put the Green with not an uppercase G. They at the Menninger Foundation in Topeka, Kansas. And later in 2005, I contacted his stepdaughter. It was Alice's daughter before she got married with Elmer. And I went there specifically to see how they did the training of the alpha theta situation, which again, it was exactly getting to the threshold of sleep. It changed from alpha brain waves mixed with theta waves, and you start seeing imagery. So it was just a confirmation. But it happened, it was near Thanksgiving, and Elma was in California and decided to drive to that city where she was living and stop by. So I got to meet the guy. An old guy, retired, so it was interesting. Now, when I came to the United States with all my experiments in South Africa, I thought about if I should write something, a little book about that. But I wasn't sure if I had enough material to do it. So, and I had, other than my other experience, when we were doing a group work with Bianca and a professor in Brasilia. Bianca was from Belo Horizonte, and the professor there in Brasilia, I can't remember his name now, I'm sorry. He organized the group, and we'll practice, we'll have discussions, and that helped me a lot to see the other people, to hear the other people's stories, how they solve problems, how they got into other situations that were not very good, and so on. But it took a while. I wrote the book proposal, and I'm not sure, I can't remember how I got in touch with somebody who is a publisher, and he read and said, well, I'm sorry, there are already too many books published on out-of-body experience, so I don't think it's a good idea to publish that. We are not interested. Well, the truth is, after that, many people publish books on out-of-body experience, so in Lucid Dreams, so it was a wrong idea. But I back up on that, and I started the internet. I met with Charles Gooding from Hawaii. He's a lawyer there, and he had a website on out-of-body experiences, and he published many articles from several authors. And so I asked him if he would be interested if I write something. But he suggested me that I should perhaps start a website and publish my own writings there. So that's what I did, a very simple HTML program that's easy to do. At least for me it was, because I do use similar things in tagging with writing physics papers. So I wrote that, and it had been on for quite a while until I just turned it off because I wasn't putting anything new, I was doing other stuff. So presently, those old writings that then got incorporated in the book and expanded, I also have it on the academia.edu. It's academia, instead of academy, like the store, academia.edu. So if you search for my name there, you see my R's. I have both my physics and my other writings. And from there, yeah, I didn't bring that, but a lady from France, she wrote, she had a magazine she called Rêver, which is to dream. And I published an article on Kundalini. She asked me if I could write about it, and I wrote about my experience, about what I knew. And there was another guy who then turned out to become a physiologist and neuroscientist, a professor now, quite well established, and he had his other point of view. So she had the 2 articles in the magazine. It's a pity it didn't continue. You know, it's difficult to keep a magazine like that. But anyway, a book got in the back burner about that time. You know, that's much more than just writing articles. So that's what I'm saying, that my other experiences other than out-of-body lucid dreaming. And of course, meeting Jean-Christophe Terillon to the contacts to that website for sleep problems on the University of California, San Diego. And then we decided, you know, with our discussions and the exchange of mainly text and emails, we then built the paper of recurrent isolated sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis, that situation where you wake up and you can't move. And frequently you have a strong sensation of electricity going up and down your back. And if you don't know what it is, it's tough. The problem is that sometimes the third eye opens, or you know, you can hear, and depending on the frequency that it is tuned, you can see either good or bad beings, you know, trying to approach you. The bad ones like to play you in a bad way. That makes people think that they are going crazy, and people really get scared of that. So, and I presented that paper in 1999 at the University of Virginia at Charlottesville in a meeting for the Society for Scientific Exploration. And I'm jumping ahead, I'm sorry. New Connection, I met Bob Price in 2004. It was before I went to San Antonio. And Don Cvilic, that's from the Institute of Neuroscience and Consciousness Studies. And Don insisted that I give a presentation for INACS. I said, okay. And so I started preparing. I was starting my second turn in interaction with the relativity group at the University of Texas, and I was there and working on the talk instead of doing physics. And then at the end, okay, now I had to find a title. Now what? And then, you know, I included HYPNAGOGIA, but also the funny thing is, again, it's an inspiration. It came out of the blue, bubbled up as building a relationship with the unconscious mind. A relationship, and that is a funny thing, because that's what we do when we go deep, you know, you meditate, go deep, you kind of build this relationship. And the most important of them is the relation with the higher self, right, or the superconscious mind. But I was too shy and worried, so I wrote everything down and made a big article of that. So this article I divide in 2, is part on where I talk about hypnotism, part in where I talk about, you know, where I have that little mind figure in there. And I made it fun, you know, put sounds like for Kundalini, you know, with lightning and thunder, because that's one thing that you can have too. So, and then 2 years later, I did a second presentation for INACS, and I decided to talk about beyond hypnagogia, the state beyond the threshold when you go out of the body. Well, my experiences were so-so, even more to the weak side. But I discovered people who were not only good in doing out-of-body experiences and getting really interesting experience out there, but also in lucid dreaming. So I selected Jürgen Ziel. Jürgen Ziel was a meditator of the Eastern type and really serious. He did a serious practice since he was young. And then he would fall asleep and discover himself out there. And he would establish his awareness at a higher level, and then the amount of experience that he had is amazing. So if you get that book, it's one thing to see. He called it the multidimensional man. Then he wrote a second book, and one about his experience with meditation, but this was the one. And by you see the little colors and folds, you see that I was very interested. And the other one was a guy who actually worked very serious in lucid dreaming, that's Robert Wagner. So, and he, again, you see many little things that I know, and I introduced, talk about that in the talk. And the third one, Preston Dennett, I lost the book, and now this moving, moved houses twice last year, so I got lost some stuff, so that one. But it's a thin book, and he's a natural person, a person who has a natural ability to go out of the body. I know somebody else, a guy from Serbia called Momir Maksimovic, who is another guy who had lots of experience, and he started with lucid dreaming, and then he learned to get out of the body, from the awakened state. And but Preston then has this book, and the funny thing, he likes to write about UFOs and odd stories. So that was the only thing he wrote about out-of-body experiences. But they did not describe hypnagogias per se. It was beyond that. Like Jürgen Ziel, he would do his practice in the morning. Those mornings are magical. And then he'll fall asleep, and then he started experience, and they were very intense. He'll come back. He'll review before waking up, complete waking up, review the experience, and then write down on the detailed. And also he had an important peak experience, you can see, where it's like you get caught up and transform like to the universe. And these experiences are phenomenal and they are important because it's one of the things that can happen to us, and it's not well known. Though we have Richard Buke book on cosmic experiences, right? And William James talking about the same type of experiences. They call the religious experience because many people who practice certain type of meditation that's more emotional tend to produce those results. Well, getting to know the Moore Institute. While at Fermilab, I learned about the Moore Institute and got the book and read it. So in 1988, I was getting ready to return to Brazil, and so I contacted Moore Institute to know if I could visit his research institution. I wanted to know what kind of research they could do in out-of-body experience. And I was surprised they said I couldn't. And they usually, if you are a research institution, you are open to receive other scientists to learn about what you're doing. They insisted that no, I could only go there if I decided to participate in the Gateway program. Well, the amount of money needed for that, plus travel expenses, was beyond my ability to pay. So I said, well, you can buy the tapes and do it yourself. So I bought, that time it was about $500. It was awfully expensive. But I got it and tried, and then, what? It didn't have the effect that I could get much more from my exercises than from in the tape at the end would make click and jump me out of the whole thing. And it was so irritating. I just packed them off and moved back to Brazil. I never played them again. It's amazing. But, so it was a big disappointment. Yeah, as I said, they only interested in getting me to pay to participate in that program. And I thought, that's not a not-for-profit institution, come on. And then, this is more recent. There was already 2008, INACS called Thomas Campbell to the suggestion of Gary Sionski, right? And then Thomas Campbell, it was one of the best, him and Dennis Menerick was the best explorers of the other side to the instruments that they have there and recordings, the booth that they prepared for this. And of course, his book, My Theory of Everything, doesn't talk much about it. It talks a little bit, but he's more interested in develop his theory of the universe in like a digital way of describing the universe. And that's all fine. But I began contacting him and changing and asking about his experiences, and it got to be something interesting. So I wrote the chapter on that, and I had, to write that chapter, I met with Tom Campbell to Skype, and we talked at least 2 hours, and clarifying details, how he changed his out-of-body experience. He complained it was always fuzzy, and it can be quite fuzzy, and the difficulties in keeping high-level awareness, and you tend to fall asleep. So, and then I got one experiment where with Dennis Menerick, they got to confirm they were talking with an entity on the other side. And when they came back, Robert Moore switched the 2 tapes, and they were matching the experience and the same type of communication. And they were surprised. From that time on, they believed what they were experiencing. So it was much better to interact with Tom Campbell, that's for sure. He's a physicist like me. And, being open to meet people and talk with them, and he was always open. I don't know where he finds out the energy to do it, but he does. So he got a pretty good following by now. And now he's doing my physics. I was surprised. So he wrote the preface for my book. You see that, you can read if you get it. So, plan a book, and planning is funny. We plan and plan and plan, and then it's okay, now it's time to write. And you procrastinate. Oh boy. Oh, no, not quite. No. You really had to sit down and start writing, and then you kind of get into the flow, right? That's another psychological term here. And then you keep going and then adding stuff, and it gets done. Amazingly, it gets done. But there's a tough question, laziness, fair agents and publisher. And then, thanks God, Amazon.com came with Create Space that allows you to publish the book by, that publish on demand print. And they had the Kindle, so you can publish in both. And it's perfect because you have more control, so I was glad. Donated all my books on publishing and such, so didn't need it. But friends' incentive was important, like Stephen Harp. We have one of the groups here, Randy. And they invited me to talk about the spiritism in Brazil, so I had to write that part, so that became a chapter. And then I went back to talk about the esoteric philosophy, so I increased and included that in a chapter, and from then on I kept just writing and writing. But Charles McClelland and my friend Isabel Silveira from Portugal, they all read a chapter every time I finish one. I'll send to them, and they read it and give their thought and how it went. And later, editing can be expensive. So Bill mentioned he was my neighbor at that time in South Austin. And I asked a question. He had published a book, and he said, and I complained about the price of editing. And then one day he said, you know, I can check your book, so I'll edit it for you. And he did that for free. So later I did find somebody who was more affordable, but he had done the most important part, you know, correct my Portuguese, influenced English, you know, it does. And as Bob Price complained that my vocabulary was poor, so I had that bug here in my head to try to fix it. And you know, all those people ask, check my words if I'm not repeating myself, tell me if I'm expanding on that. So all these count a lot, friends and colleagues that help us. Okay, and so as I said, you just get going until you get it done. And so telling my story and the process of learning, my experiences. And then the last chapter, I do a kind of a review of the life of learning about the mind and consciousness. But also, what was it that I was searching for? Out-of-body experience? It was much more than that, wasn't it? And the problem with the spiritual communication, and those odd things like we had longing, the levels of consciousness, all those things, you know, came up. The longing is an amazing thing because that seems to come from the soul. And I had those many times in my life, and I would just wonder why I was feeling that way. You know, it just was there. It was later that I started connecting to this longing and seeing what was the origin of it. And things start happening. So, at this point, have I stopped my synchronous discoveries? No, it continues. One way, in other, it keeps adding. So, as I said, there is academia.edu. I put the old writings there. The book, I only put a preview of the book. And any new writings that relate or not to the book will be stored there. So if you have interest in there, you can always visit. If I have your mail and I put an article there, I can always, you know, communicate to you that it's there, you can download. So let's go back and focus consciousness and other issues and the details of these points brought up in the book. Here it is again, that little picture. And remember, it is that way we get to know this deeper part of the mind and the crossing to the other side, to cross it to these other dimensions. And the problem with consciousness, there is a problem with the level of consciousness. Even while you're awake, those levels change all the time. Trance where you are distracted, you are in kind of a trance. Sometimes when you're reading a book or watching a movie, and such. While you're learning, it gets a different thing. When you're in love, that involves emotion, it gets a different thing too. So all relates to consciousness or the mind, or you know, it's one and the same thing. So of course, we never know what's the goal, do we? So sometimes when you're trying to learn a new thing, you don't know what it is. Again, as I said, I put that wish out there, and synchronicity event kind of tend to come and bring it to me in some way, some odd way it happened. When it happened, I said, oh, here it is, thank you. Okay, the other problem is when you go to practice any techniques, the Oriental techniques like meditation is different from the Occidental or European or Middle Eastern related to Christianity and such. They are different, and that sometimes creates problem because we tend to use the same words. And then here comes these guys from the later part of the 19th century, and principally Jung, which actually I take as more seriously than Freud, pardon me. I like Jung much less because he is more intuitive, he gets the thing and he gets the experience and he gets means to make it work. And there, of course, the unconscious come from Jung. And then he developed a faculty to help his clients they call active imaginations as a means to communicate with unconscious or mind. And the interesting thing is not just the visual. He would use sculpture, drawings, and everything. And funny enough, remote viewing now in the 90s use the same thing. Isn't that amazing? And I was surprised they used the pendulum too. And here's another thing. Oh, I was so amazed. The book Walking Through Walls is the son, Philip Smith, talking about his father and how much, and the most amazing things, and because of the title of the book, is returning home and his father was in some deep trance in communication with spirit and wouldn't answer the door until somebody weird that looks like Lurch, right, from the Frankenstein thing, came out and talked to him, explained why his father couldn't come. And then he was going away and I said, why didn't you had to ask to open the door? You could, if you are the son of your father, you could just go to the walls. It's the most amazing thing ever that I have seen that, you know, odd things, of course. And is the guy lying? Is he making it up? It's not. He's talking about his father, and his father used to be very careful in taking notes and stuff. So that it's like he was predicting his son in the future would write about him, like that. So William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience, 1902. Richard Bush's Cosmic Consciousness, 1901, is all talking about what I'm talking in this book, in their ways, about the peak of cosmic experience. You know, the other psychologists are just the eldest ones. And I have to remind here my husband over there, my new husband, I got married last year, so again. And he said, I don't believe in the supernatural. And then he discovered that book there among my book and started reading. Oh, but this is so amazing. I said, that's what I'm talking about. But that's what I'm talking about, you know, to all in the book and to you, that those amazing things, we need to learn about them. We need to study them seriously, not just dismiss them, you know, sweep under the rug is just crazy people. No. And other people like Colin Wilson, he called it the robot, this automatic factor, which is very important to us. You know, that's why we have exceptional musicians playing very difficult, you know, works in the piano or another instrument. Is using the robot. That's how we learn to drive a car and then go conversations, and you don't have to think very much when you go to work every day. That's the robot. But then what the colonists used to call attention is also the type of thing it can go berserk and cause problems and make you drag your life, and you miss important things. So it has to be careful. Another thing that impressed very much since I was young, you know, even before I was 18, the Fraternity of Rosicrucian in São Paulo translated this little book, The Psychology of Man's Possible Evolution, and I was amazed with his first statement. Man is a machine, human beings are a machine, and our ability to have many eyes. Well, the multiple man over there is talking about that, and sometimes it can go problematic, right? But in every day we change, every time we change one type of thing in the other, we are getting those other eyes. I thought that was interesting. And that normal consciousness can be sometimes automatic, just like Colin Wilson's The Robot. But more, he talked about a way to develop, that's what they call the fourth wave on the Good Chef school, which was a problematic school in many ways, but you know, it followed the same thing of the development of consciousness to reach these higher levels of consciousness, or higher levels of the mind. So, in my understanding, after so many years of investigation of my own and other people's experiences, that it appears that we don't actually need any gurus that, you know, go and to become a nun or monk in religious order, or following some weird techniques from secret esoteric schools and something that I hate, secret. I like open knowledge that we share, we discuss, we talk to everybody. So, if I can live a life like that and get to this age and have all this experience and can write this book about it, everybody can do the same, right? But it's disorganized. We had to recognize that. Nobody had, a big organization of what we know from now. If Richard Brooke and William James were writing about this in the beginning of the 20th century, we're still here and we still haven't organized that in a serious thing. So, take notes, hear other stories, experience, and that helps a lot. But, I'm sorry. Let me go back to that. So that's one problem. At some point I talk about as soon as knowledge is organized, you can organize schools where you learn about it. We have some, of course, but they follow preference here, preference there. It's not global, it's not unified. Anyway, let's go back to the issue of sleep paralysis or the nightmarish hypnagogias. The title of the paper is Does Recurrent, oh my God, I repeat that, I'm sorry. Isolation paralysis involve more than cognitive neuroscience. That was the paper. This paper was so significant in the 90s, the late 90s, that I decided to include in the second appendix of the book. First appendix, I'm talking about the hypnagogia book that I consider important too. And all that is taken from the stories, so people telling about the experience should be taken seriously. Of course, there will be people exaggerating and lying, but after a while, they are easy to spot because lying is difficult. You have to be consistent. So I contacted Jean-Christophe. That was 1998. In 1999, as I said already, in Charlottesville, I presented that. Jean-Christophe is one who had really intense sleep paralysis or the hypnagogias, emitting beams and such. Not of the worst type, but what he told me is interesting. And again, they report the entity, which is, you can find it on YouTube, by the way. I was surprised. For a while, I couldn't find anything or how to get it. And David Hufford is one guy who wrote a book about that in a different perspective. The Terror That Comes in the Night, an experiential study of supernatural occult traditions. So that goes and is some academic book, not in psychology, not in the physiology or neuroscience, in a different way, anthropology and religion. These people can deal with that, not quantitatively, but qualitatively. So they collect the stories and they analyze the characteristics, and it's this from this organization that you can write a work like that. And this is the picture, Andrew Fuseli, The Nightmare. When I presented this at University of Virginia, it was a big auditorium with a huge screen, probably for movies. And I present this whole picture, feel the thing. At the end of the day, we had a dinner, outside the building, and everybody came to talk to me about that. They were impressed. The shock of the picture. Here it is in color. But there it is, the little demon sitting on the chest, because one of the people think they can't breathe and such. And of course the horse there, because that's nightmare. And of course, who practice meditation in one form or the other, even if you're just doing a process of intense learning, you can produce activity in the life energies, as the Christians call it, or the Kundalini energies. It's a form of nerve or something else, we're not sure. We call it energies as a simplistic physical term, but that's why. And the scholars from Cyprus call that the life energy and the responsibility of the Trinity. You have the Father, the Son, which is the Logos, and the Holy Spirit is called, these are the Holy Spirit. And it's the same energy that gets involved in creating a new being in the womb of a woman or the female in general. So that is correlated with the phenomena that characterize Kundalini level of activity, from the very basic ones to the extreme ones of Kundalini awakening. And again, frequently stem from meditative practice. It usually has to be continuous, a persistent practice, and for a certain period of time. If you do that, you're going to start noticing changes, not only in your state of mind and your emotions, but then you can start seeing that. Again, the information obtained that comes only through people's stories. So they had to be taken note, they had to be analyzed. We don't have neurophysiological data, of course, because it needs a physical instrument, and those things appear out of the blue. A person does not go somewhere with a physical instrument to try to see what's going on in the EEG from his head. So it has to be the story that then is analyzed qualitatively, which is a technique that the social scientists at the University of Chicago started to analyze the phenomena of social science. But you can use in anthropology, you can use in this thing. What they call quantitative analysis involves statistical analysis. To do a statistical analysis, you have to know the phenomena clearly, and then see how frequent it happens, in a certain situation. So it doesn't apply. So techniques to contact and develop relationship with the subconscious mind. That was the subject of chapter 14, again related to the talk I gave to INACS, the first talk on the unconscious, and the chapter 14 when I review all these methods. And that includes the intense mind process of learning and memory, introspection practice in general. That includes of course, when you're learning, you get introspected the same way. And the issues of emotion, the state of trance, or what is loosely defined as trance. And again, lucid dreaming developed a technique, what they call the seeding or imprinting of the unconscious, the subconscious mind, they call it that, which is the same thing. You are interacting, you are in a relationship with your unconscious too. Then when you are dreaming, suddenly that kind of is like bubbling up, and suddenly, oh, I'm not dreaming, I'm going to fly, right? And waking somnambulism hypnotism was discovered by accident, or Mesmer more or less brushed about it, but it was later that it was more seen that the person get into a trance and it changes personality. Something else comes out. That's why they have the multiple personality. Sometimes it's a higher level, and sometimes it's not so higher level. And again, the phenomenon of synchronicity is like you establish a wish, you want to do that, and then you forget about it, right? Oh, okay, I don't know how to do this, and and then one day the least you expect, boom, you either find a reference or meet a person who talks about it, and it's like you interacting with much more than your mind. You interact with the universe in some way, more than the physical world, more than that, because sometimes it can be in really extreme way. And the Jung's active imagination, I have read a little more about it to understand. I haven't read much Jung until recently, and Kevin's story was a surprise. That's what called my attention. And Charles McClelland had a philosophy group with Stephen Harp, right? Kevin. And he was about less than 5 miles from my house, so I asked if I could go and participate. So that's when Kevin then told me about his experience, or somebody, or Charles or Stephen mentioned that. So I just got that in chapter 14, but in a quite incomplete form. And I might write a little more about that. And by reading about Jung's active imagination, it's obvious. Yeah, these are the two books I like, Robert Jones' Inner Work, Lucid Dreams and Active Imagination for Personal Growth. And he had some extreme experience that he talks about. And again, there it is, peak experience, cognitive experience, whatever you call it. And the other is this Jean Chodorov, Encounter Jung, Jungian Alchemy, Jungian Evil, Jungian Active Imagination. So it's in one short book, not so short, it's about that thick. So it has enough there that you don't have to go to Jung's collective works. So one thing that I noticed is that active imagination appears to have been used frequently by Western esoteric practices, and Jung does touch there, though not defined as such, but as the practice they call concentration and meditation. In other schools, like from Daskalo's school, he called it concentration, visualization. He had he put a lot of emphasis in practicing visualization. But the meditation was something odd that since childhood I read it, I didn't understand. Fixing your attention to a certain image in the mind and waiting for it to develop automatically without the conscious mind interference, which is exactly what the active imagination is, according to Jung. So, and he was aware from both from the esoteric teachings and the Eastern practices. So he didn't refer to anything, but as I know those and I have been reading about that for such a long time, I immediately connected. And of course, he understood the difference between the East and modern meditation practice, as well as the concentration meditation. And with that, he gave a lot of importance to his clients' drawings, mandalas, and so on. You know, the circle with drawings. He was able to understand the progress of his clients in his treatments through his drawings of mandalas, the circles and the drawings, how it distributed and so on. So it's amazing. I'm not very good with symbols, so I look at that, beautiful or not so beautiful, and that's about it. I get confused about symbols. So you can imagine my relationship with my subconscious or unconscious. If it's too symbolic, it goes over here sometimes. It had to come to other means. So in developing his active imagination and studying the history practice of these two medieval practices, he understood the similarities. And it's interesting to observe how Jung understood the process of individuation that he calls as quite the same as the attainment of enlightenment in both Eastern and Western traditions. And I found that amazing. So what is it with meditation? We nowadays practice a lot of that. Joe was one of the things he does starting this, right? But they are different. In the Occident, they goes more to visualization. I mean, you do something about, you create an imagery on that. In the Eastern, you kind of stop everything, and if something comes up, some of them don't even like it. And the religions, the Christians had the contemplation, which also the esoteric sometimes mention that, which is another type of meditation without image, just sort of emotional attunement to the depth of the mind, and that, you know, the connection with the higher self in some way. And that also can get to development of the energetic consequences. And the Kundalini phenomenon seems to be both psychic and physical to the nervous system. So we have quite a work to do in studying that, in my opinion. But there are other interesting phenomena in practice meditation in the Eastern style that it's not always described in the Western style. So like a nirvana, that's kind of a zero thing, or black hole sometimes people call, and all the experience of ecstatic nature. And more exact situation, of course, including the Kundalini awakening. But there are dangers in this area. Consistent teachings in the West and New Age workshops that practice certain meditation and breathe in the Eastern types that can get benefits but also dangers, and not always they are prepared for the dangers and what to do with them. So we have to be careful with that. So we need to know better about the mind and consciousness. We need to know a lot better. Have to unify and, you know, do something about that. It's not going to be me, right? I'm too old. And besides, I'm a physicist. I'm neither a psychologist or physiologist. Somebody has to get there. But, you know, that's how we start, by exploring, by communicating, and telling your own stories. And it would be good if we could be prepared for phenomena. Otherwise, it's just, what is this? That's crazy. And I say there, that's my physics part. Never mind quantum physics. We learn to learn about that first, before pushing quantum physics to explain all that. Because there are no consistent research on nervous and physiological perceptual phenomena stemming from this practice. No. And as I said, for now, only qualitative research is a reasonable research tool, because we need to know what the phenomena before doing the statistics. So we need more personal stories. Laboratory research, well, the EEG and functional MRI tools of psych phenomena, it's problematic. Not always they show up. You can't control them most of the time. So you get to the laboratory, you know, all the different environment kind of closes the person up, and it doesn't happen. They say, oh, so no, we can't, it doesn't exist then. No, it does. It's just when at the lab, you know, it doesn't come when you need. And that was quite evident in the 70s when they first tried that. Principally with the Robert Morrow out-of-body experience in Charlottesville area. And there are no research works that relate Western and Eastern practice, having in mind the understanding of their effects on the mind and consciousness, both from the nervous system point of view and from the psychic perception-related experience, or else, something else, you know, beyond the physical world. And again, control in the area of consciousness-related states, phenomena, and so on, still just a myth. It's not something that is easy to develop, if at all. You know, esoteric philosophies claim that it is, and including they claim that mediumship is a negative type of experience, which is not fair. It's just another phenomenon. I now understand that. And that saved the spirituals in Brazil, who have worked a lot with mediums. So what about quantum physics related to mind and consciousness? This is the latest fashionable thing to relate consciousness to quantum physics. And New Age people looking to make some money on that would use the word that, but I consider that dishonest, because it's just, you know, a promotion of something fashionable that doesn't have much meaning. So the definition of quantum physics is supposed to be an accumulation of energy that propagates to space and time. Of course, the time develops as it propagates. Sometimes as a wave, sometimes as a particle, and sometimes you can detect in one or other. And the mathematics developed to understand this is into field theories called quantum mechanics. There's another type of field theory that what I do, we use what we call Lagrange analysis of energy, but quantum mechanics use what they call Hamiltonians, that it makes a little difference. So, in my point of view, I don't believe we should use theoretical concepts developed to understand physical world and physical phenomena to explain consciousness. At least not for now, maybe in the future. Why? It just becomes a burden. It's one more word and label to, pollute what already sometimes can be confusing. Theories in physics in general are useful for as long as they can describe phenomena precisely. And then if you need to be modifying the theory for very much, soon enough it's abandoned. Quantum physics has remained in many ways, which is success, but it's being difficult to relate to the other parts. Classical, it's not quite clear how to do it, and people keep modifying classical field theories to include quantum physics, and vice versa, and that not always happen. It becomes just one more paper there, and it becomes again a pollution information. It doesn't help much. But mind and consciousness is not a physical thing. In fact, neuroscientists like to say mind is virtual because you can't put your finger on. It might be something else. And of course, I'm not a quantum physicist, I'm a classical physicist, so let me accelerate now, right, Joe? My physics, I do work with the energy and the fields, and I try to describe, and that is what they call unified field theories. It's a continuation of Einstein's attempt to unify gravity and electromagnetism. And we include Young-Mills fields in my case. And there's some specific mathematics to do that. So, using any theory in physics like quantum physics by consciousness, therefore considered to be an aberration for now. I would just wait a little more until we understand this. But again, I may be wrong. I don't discount that. And here it is, the IONS mission that Joe asked me, to create a shift in consciousness worldwide where people recognize that we are all part of an interconnected whole and are inspired to take action to help humanity and the planet thrive. Well, sociology is a good area to deal with that. When and if a shift in consciousness is achieved in numbers large enough to influence the whole of human society, then they have a better chance to produce such a shift. From my point of view, what I have been doing is mainly exploring in a personal type. And that includes, as I say here, multidimensional character of the human being, which is not very well understood. But it is a crucial goal of all human beings. It is an individual learning, but of course, the more of us know and practice and understand, the more it can maybe reach at certain point, a point where we have that shift. So my book is a little curiosity, a story of my personal learning about consciousness and the mind, a very little contribution. So I believe it's quite likely that the consequence of understanding the mind and consciousness fully could be, as stated by IONS mission. I agree with that. But for now, it's just too soon to know. After all, we have President Trump in charge, right? He's making a mess there. I don't know. We will need established knowledge in the development of specialized schools, and that's what I mean, the specialized schools that deals with the mind, that prepares a child and a young person for all those phenomena. and practices, so that, then these numbers would be increased significantly. But the schools can be problematic, right? They have to be careful. It has to be unified in some way. So learning to have out-of-body experiences, communicate with spirit or other worlds, to have mystical experiences, speak or cognitive experience, or controlling whatever special psychic skill available to the human being, or about the unconscious, as Carl Jung calls our non-conscious level of consciousness. To not be so robot, as Colin Wilson and Ouspensky call this automatic feature of our consciousness. And it frequently robs us of important awareness of the world around us, so it's important to understand that. And the message interactions with our unconscious, because that's how we are going to see not only the physiological unconscious, but also the one that connects to our soul, our spirit, whatever you call it. And again, about the existence of anomalous events, not only with ourselves, but out in the physical world. And appear to include both physical and psychical. So they may be crucial to our ability to survive, but they are not important attitudes to a very important goal. We need to know ourselves better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You cover a lot of territory, didn't you?
Yeah, but stories keep going, so we have to be careful.
Well, thank you, Shirley. We are running a little late, so what I'd like to do is take just a couple moments for just a very few questions.
Okay, and?
You talked a bit about educating people in a systematic educational process.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I've always felt like some people were, I don't know what words to use that don't sound prejudiced, were on this path and can have these experiences, and other people were not prone to them.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think there is some level of, I don't know, soul development experience that would make somebody an appropriate student if you're creating educational institutions that provide exposure to this? I mean, in an ideal world, I think it would be lovely to let kids in every school know that these things exist.
Yes, of course.
But I think it could be quite difficult to try to teach them in regular schools, because if you get the kid who says, I can't out-of-body experience, I'm a failure.
And I believe that was completely, I had zero ability to do that.
Yeah.
My belief is that everybody has one thing or the other. If you say, I don't know anything about out-of-body experiences or lucid dream, and then they tell you, oh, I had those dreams, and then from there, I'm going to fly. That, out in everyday life, this happens. Or they know they get the phone and they were thinking about somebody, that's somebody on the phone that they called them. So if you put a person from childhood aware of these possibilities, they start happening more frequently. So the more you learn about it, the more things. So when you have something, you see lights in your threshold of sleep, oh, what are those dreams? That's odd, right? Why seeing lights? And why they're so bright? Sometimes even bother you. Well, okay, those are energies. So, okay, something. If you get sick, sometimes you see them. You see the body. You can perceive your body reacting. So,
That makes sense.
and that's why I say, when the knowledge is more uniform, unified, west and east, and then you teach the person about that, there'll be always a discovery that they already have those experiences, and then they improve from there. It happens more frequently.
Thank you.
But the physicality of it is interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And this may be a little bit wrong of me to do this, but could you compare this to like the people used to believe that female orgasm was a myth? And that just didn't happen. And it took a long time for science to discover that females do have orgasms. It was a physical process that if you're not looking for it, you don't get it.
You don't get it, but that's the point.
It's kind of
That's
like
the point. Yeah, and that's why I say, somebody say, oh, I dream of flying, then I ask, how did you dream? How did you decide to fly in your dream? Oh, I just discovered myself. I knew I was dreaming, so okay, I'm flying, dream I can fly. It's the same thing, same principle. You don't know it's happening, but it's there.
There's stories.
Yeah,
There's no proof until.
exactly. There's no proof until you understand, you organize, and then you say a person, a child, for example, okay, you can do this and this and that.
And that's for UFO stories too.
Yeah.
I think until you're abducted, you don't really think.
Or you see one, right? Like when I went to Brazil in 2017, I walked on the beach with my brother's neighbor, the lady there, and I talked her. I don't know how it came out. So I think I told her I was finishing writing the book, and about UFOs related to Bianca, and I said, oh, I saw a UFO at this beach. Huge, enormous, flying over the sea, over the hill over there. And my brother was on the other side of the hill fishing. He saw it too. And then it entered the sea. You see, right there the sea, and then she kept trying to find in the news somebody talking about it. It took a long time until she finally discovered the news about it. And everybody came out and to look at it. So it happens.
Stephen?
I want to share something, just following that, there's a male comedian that said, you know, I don't believe women have orgasms. I've had sex with lots of women, not one of them had an what you said was a prelude to a lot of what I'm going to do on April 2nd. There actually is a new scientific study on Kundalini
Oh, there is.
experience, and there is a list we've provided of dangerous and pros and cons. So that's going to start with the April 2nd presentation.
So I should be here.
Yeah, it's following up a lot of what you're saying.
Yeah, you know, those studies, those organizational, the phenomenon, I think helps a lot. It's not getting surprised like I had. What's this?
Yeah.
Hell, that's weird.
We hope to provide that.
Yeah. Yes?
I found it interesting how you make such a point of differentiating the psychical phenomena from the phenomena described by physics, for example, in science. Would you say that it's almost like you seem to be describing it as another level of reality, and that the phenomena that we experience are kind of where we're interacting or discovering that other level? I was wondering if maybe, have you found any rules or anything you'd like to describe about that other level that you think is pretty consistent?
I haven't found anything pretty consistent. Many times it is consistent and then it breaks down. Like, for example, feeling yourself coming out of the body, you know, all the sensation that inflates and, you know, kind of fluffy, and then you move out and it disconnects. Sometimes you don't, and then you see that you're being there. Seems like you have another body. And then you have experience that it doesn't seem to have a body at all, just like the mind. So that is not consistent, isn't it? But again, that's because we don't know what's going on. It might be, you know, it's when I say we learn about physics, but that's a different kind of physics. Those other dimensions or worlds that we might have a participation in some way, we belong to there too. But we don't know, at least for now, that we don't have that clear communication, we don't know. So we still have to learn that. Yes?
Well, I was just thinking that we think of reality as like a given, like this is real. That's not real. But reality truly is perception. And if, you know, just like if you were blind, you wouldn't see, and that doesn't mean that things aren't there to be seen. So perception is, I think the science of reality and perception and with the physics of theoretical, with knowing of time and space, when you add all this, it brings I don't know, I'm just trying to say that if you experience it, you really can't say that's not real. I mean, who's to say that?
How to decide if it's real or just imagination? Is that what you mean?
And even if someone is, say, ill or something like a psychiatric disorder,
Yeah.
there's still an honor in that honoring their reality. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that we should all go for it, because we have to be as a consensus here, but
The consensus is important. So when they don't know they are mentally ill, both from the patient point of view as from the doctors. But if you understand it differently, actually that person is having a new ability to see something else that actually is there.
compassionate, that's
Yeah.
And I think that goes along with it too. A lot of things of compassion and heart
Yeah.
are intertwined with perceptions and
That too. That's why they produce phenomena, energetic phenomena.
energetic.
Yeah.